The enemy commander laughed when his scouts reported a woman sweeping brass casings on the American base. "Send the mortars," he said, lighting a cigarette. "Let the cleaning girl run." He had destroyed 3 outposts this month. He had never lost a single engagement. He did not believe in accidents. He did not believe in women who fight back. He believed this would be over in 20 minutes. He was wrong about all of it. And that mistake, that one arrogant, contemptuous laugh would cost him everything. Before we go any further, if this story hits you, subscribe to this channel, drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all began. She had a system. Most people who work at the range never thought about systems. They showed up, they did their job, they clocked out. But Sarah Mitchell was not most people, and she had learned a long time ago that the only way to survive in a world that had stopped seeing you was to become very, very good at seeing everything else. She started at the far end of the brass line, every morning the 500-meter mark, and worked her way back toward the firing platforms. The spent casings had a sound when she collected them, a kind of metallic whisper against the inside of her bucket, and she had learned to keep her movements low and smooth so that sound didn't carry. The snipers above her were training, and snipers she had discovered in her 8 months on this forward operating base did not appreciate interruptions. She had also discovered something else, something she had never told anyone, something she barely admitted to herself in the quiet hours after her shift ended, and she sat alone in the small concrete room she'd been assigned near the motor pool. She could read the wind, not the way you learn it from a book, the way you feel it, the way a certain shift in the flags told you the shot was going to pull left, the way a dust devil kicking up 200 meters downrange meant the pocket of air between shooter and target was about to change, the way you could watch a man settle into his prone position and just know before he even touched the trigger whether the shot was going to fly true. She knew this because she had been taught it once, a long time ago in a different life by a man with patient hands and a voice like gravel and tobacco who had believed in her more than anyone before or since, her father. But that was another story, and Sarah Mitchell had made a habit of not telling that story anymore. She arrived at her post at 05:30 every morning before the SEAL teams came out. That was intentional. She liked the range empty. She liked the way the desert air sat still before the sun fully committed to the day cool and almost kind before it turned brutal. She would do her first sweep of the lanes, mark anything that needed flagging for safety, check the brass collection buckets at each platform, and then settle into her rhythm. By 06:15, the teams would start arriving. Chief Petty Officer Ryan Walker always came first. She had noticed this about him early, the way he never came in. With the group, never arrived late, never arrived exactly on time. He was always early. He would walk the line alone for about 10 minutes before his men got there, checking positions, checking the flagpoles, checking the target silhouettes. He was not checking for problems. She understood that instinctively. He was doing what she did. He was reading the range, getting a feel for the morning. The first time she had seen him do this, she had stopped moving. Not because he startled her, because the way he moved was the most economical thing she had ever seen. There was no wasted motion, no extra step. He walked like someone who had calculated the exact amount of energy needed to cross a space and refused to spend a single calorie more. He was built lean mid-30s with the kind of face that looked like it had been outside for most of its life. Not handsome in an obvious way, but structured, deliberate, like someone had sat down and decided exactly what a man built for this work should look like, and then built him. She had never spoken to him. She was a cleaning contractor. She was not cleared for anything beyond her work zone. She had a badge that said Civilian Range Maintenance, and she wore it clipped to the chest pocket of her olive green utility shirt every single morning, and that badge was the clearest possible statement of who she was and who she was not in this place. She was not military. She was not special operations. She was not even the kind of civilian contractor who got briefed on things, or ate in the main dining facility, or had access to the communications building. She was the woman who picked up the brass, and she was fine with that. She had been fine with that for 8 months. Or she had told herself she was fine with it, which was close enough. Sam. The SEAL teams trained every day but Sunday. Sometimes they trained on Sunday too. Walker's unit, she had learned from overheard conversations and the patches she occasionally spotted, was part of a sniper element attached to a larger special operations task force operating out of the base. She didn't know their mission parameters. She didn't know their target packages. She knew only what she could observe, and she had trained herself to observe with the kind of quiet discipline that her father had first taught her at a paper target range in rural Montana when she was 9 years old. Walker's primary shooter this cycle was a man named Kowalski. She knew his name because Walker said it often, and he said it the way a good teacher says a student's name, not as a correction, but as an anchor. Kowalski, you're breathing wrong. Kowalski, check your natural point of aim. Kowalski, stop anticipating and let the rifle surprise you. Kowalski was good. She could see that. But he had a tell. When the wind shifted, he hesitated. Just a half second, maybe less, but she could see it in the movement of his support hand, a tiny tightening, a recalibration. It cost him, not much at 500 meters, but she had watched him shoot at 800 once, and the hesitation showed. She never said anything. She picked up brass, she watched, and she learned things about herself that she had almost forgotten. Her father's name was Raymond Mitchell, and he had been a competitive rifle shooter for most of his adult life, nothing Olympic level, but serious. Regional championships, a few national qualifiers. The kind of shooter who was respected in the community, who people drove hours to see on the line, who other competitors would quietly study from 3 lanes over. He had started teaching Sarah when she was 7, not playing at it, teaching. He had a gift for instruction that matched his gift for shooting, the ability to break a complex thing into its smallest components and explain each one with perfect clarity. The rifle doesn't lie, he used to say. Whatever you do wrong, it shows you. Whatever you do right, it shows you. All you have to do is be honest with yourself about what you're seeing. By 14, she was beating him on the range. By 16, her times and groups were attracting the kind of attention that led to conversations with coaches and trainers who used words like scholarship in team trials, and once very carefully Olympic pathway. She had believed it. She had let herself believe it. That was probably her first mistake. The second mistake was harder to define. It was less a decision than a slow surrender to a series of events that had nothing to do with shooting and everything to do with the fragility of the scaffolding that her life had been built on. Her mother's illness came first, then the financial collapse that followed it, then the decision to defer training, to take work, to send money home, to keep the family above water. Then her father's accident. Then the funeral. Then the long gray period after, when she had not touched a rifle for almost 4 years, because touching one felt like holding the last piece of something that was gone, and she wasn't ready for that. She was 31 now. She had not competed in any formal capacity in 12 years. The pathway had closed. The coaches had moved on to other prospects. The conversation had ended. What remained was this: a range in a forward operating base, in a desert she couldn't name on a public map, a brass collection bucket, and a woman who had learned to be invisible because visibility had once upon a time cost her more than she could afford to lose. On a Tuesday morning in the 3rd week of February, something happened that had never happened before. Walker spoke to her. She was collecting at the 200-meter mark, moving on her standard track, when she heard his footsteps come up behind her. Not aggressive, just purposeful. She didn't stop moving. She didn't turn around. "You always start at the 500, he said. She stopped. She turned. He was standing about 4 feet back, arms loose at his sides, watching her with an expression she couldn't immediately classify. Not hostile, not warm, evaluating. "Yes, sir," she said. The "sir" came out automatically, even though she wasn't military and didn't have to use it. "Why?" She hadn't expected a follow-up. She thought for a moment. "Spent casing scatter pattern is wider at longer ranges. If I start far and work in, I don't push debris into areas I've already cleared." He looked at her for a moment. "That's the right answer," he said. Then he walked away. She stood there for 3 seconds with her bucket in her hand, and something moved in her chest that she didn't have a name for. She went back to collecting brass. But the day felt different after that. Longer, more present, like someone had turned up the saturation on the world by about 15%. She thought about that conversation more than she should have. She analyzed it the way she used to analyze shot groups, looking for what it told her, what it confirmed, what it questioned. He had noticed her work pattern. He had asked about it. He had listened to her answer and evaluated it and given her the result of that evaluation in 4 words. That's the right answer. Nobody on this base had spoken to her that way in 8 months. Not dismissively, not unkindly. Most of them just didn't speak to her at all, which was fine, which was the arrangement, which was what she had chosen. But something about being seen, really seen, even for just 30 seconds, had cracked something open that she hadn't realized was sealed shut. That night, for the first time in years, she dreamed about shooting. Not a combat dream, not a nightmare. Just the clean, simple, almost meditative act of lying behind a rifle breathing, feeling the world narrow down to a single point of focus and releasing. She woke up at 3 a.m. with her heart doing something complicated and her eyes already open. She lay in the dark for a long time. Then she got up, got dressed, and went to work 2 hours early. The next 3 weeks established a new rhythm that she tried very hard to pretend wasn't happening. She was paying attention differently. She had always watched that with survival habit background processing, but now she was watching with intent, storing information, building an internal model of Walker's unit, their training methodology, their individual shooter tendencies. Kowalski's hesitation on wind shifts, she cataloged it. The new addition to the team, a young shooter named Torres who had beautiful natural position but consistently over-controlled his trigger, she cataloged that too. Walker's spotter, a compact and always moving man named Jason Ortiz, had a voice that carried. He called corrections in a rapid clipped cadence, and she had memorized the pattern of it without trying wind call range, confirmation, elevation adjustment, fire command. Clean and precise. She had started mentally preceding his calls by 2 or 3 seconds, running the same calculation in her head, checking her internal answer against his spoken one. She was right more often than she was wrong. She never told anyone that, but she started to understand with a growing feeling that was somewhere between grief and wonder that the skill had never left. It had gone dormant the way things do when you stop feeding them. But it was there. Underneath 8 months of invisibility and 12 years of silence, it was absolutely still there, and it was hungry. Sorry. You were watching Torres's grip again, Walker's voice. She nearly dropped her bucket. She had not heard him come up. He was 3 feet to her left and slightly behind, which was not where she had believed him to be, and the fact that she had been wrong about his position bothered her more than the fact that he had spoken. I wasn't, she started. You were, he said, not unkindly. You do it every session. You watch the hands, and he paused. What do you see? She opened her mouth, closed it, looked at him. He waited. He was good at waiting. She had noticed that about him, the absolute absence of impatience. He would wait as long as it took, and he would not fill the silence for you. He's fighting the trigger, she said finally. He wants the shot to happen on his schedule. He hasn't learned to let the rifle work. A beat. How long have you been shooting? Walker asked. The question landed like a stone dropped into still water. Concentric circles, ripples going out in every direction. I haven't, she said. Not for a long time. But you did. Yes. How long? She looked away from him, out toward the target line. I stopped when I was 19. I shot competitively from age 7 to 19. And before you stopped, she felt something tighten in her throat. I was pretty good. Walker nodded once slowly, like she had confirmed something he had already decided. He looked at the range. He looked back at her. Sarah, he said. It was the first time anyone on this base had said her first name. She felt it like a physical thing. Yes, sir. How many times in the last 3 months have you called Ortiz's wind corrections before he called them out loud? The silence that followed was the loudest thing she had ever heard. She stared at him. I wasn't, she began. Lips move, he said, simply, not accusatory, just factual. When you're doing math, your lips move a little. Did you know that she had not known that? She felt her face go warm. Walker looked at her for another long moment. Something moved in his expression, not quite a smile, but the structural precursor to the thing that lives underneath the surface. You've got good eyes, he said. You've got good instincts. And you've got 12 years of compacted experience sitting inside you like a compressed spring. He paused. I don't know what happened at 19. I'm not asking. But I want you to know whatever it was, it didn't take the ability. It just took the outlet. He walked away again, and Sarah Mitchell stood alone at the 200-meter mark with her brass collection bucket in her hand and her eyes stinging in the desert air. She did not cry. She almost did, but she didn't. She bent down and picked up a spent casing and put it in the bucket and kept moving, because that was what she did. That was the arrangement. That was who she was now, and she was fine with that. She was fine. But something had shifted. She could feel it the way you feel a change in barometric pressure before a storm, not in any single measurable way, but in the aggregate, in the texture of the air, in the way her body was processing information differently than it had the day before. That evening, she went back to her room and sat on the edge of her bunk and thought about her father. She thought about the way his hands had felt covering hers on the stock of a rifle, adjusting her grip 1 millimeter at a time. She thought about his voice, about the patience of it, the absolute unshakable belief that she could do the thing he was teaching her, that the only question was time and attention and honesty. She thought about what Walker had said. It didn't take the ability, it just took the outlet. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. She thought, what am I doing here? She thought, what am I waiting for? She thought, is it already too late? And then she lay down and stared at the ceiling and listened to the distant sound of a helicopter making its approach to the landing pad. And she did not have answers to any of those questions, but she noticed with a clarity that surprised her that for the first time in a very long time, she was asking them. That felt like something. Maybe that was enough for tonight. 4 days before the attack, Torres had his breakthrough. She saw it from 40 meters away. He had been working at 300 meters, fighting that trigger habit the way he always did. And then something changed. She couldn't explain how she knew the way. You can't always explain how you know anything that lives in the body rather than the mind. But she saw the moment when he stopped fighting and started listening. The shot broke clean. The group on the target tightened by what she estimated was 40%. Ortiz whooped. Even Walker, standing off to the left, allowed himself a single nod that from him was equivalent to a standing ovation. Torres did it again and again. Sarah watched from behind her bucket and felt something in her chest expand, a kind of vicarious joy that she hadn't expected and didn't know how to process. She was happy for him, genuinely. A man she had never spoken to, whose name she only knew from overheard exchanges, had learned something, and she was standing 40 meters away, feeling proud of him. She pressed her lips together. She picked up another casing. Walker glanced at her from across the range. Their eyes met for just a moment, 2 seconds, maybe less, and he gave her the smallest nod. She understood it. He had seen her watching. He knew she had seen the breakthrough. He was sharing it with her the only way the protocol of their respective positions allowed. She nodded back. And that small exchange, that 2-second moment of wordless acknowledgement, was more connection than she had felt with another human being in longer than she cared to count. She went back to work. The desert sky above the range was a deep and violent blue. The wind flags were steady, and somewhere on the other side of the perimeter in the hills that curved around the base like cupped hands, something was being planned that none of them knew about yet. The quiet was still holding, but it wouldn't hold for long. The night before the attack, Sarah couldn't sleep. This was not unusual for her. She had never been a good sleeper, and the desert heat plus the concrete walls of her assigned room created conditions that were technically livable but not exactly restful. But this was different. This was the kind of wakefulness that has a texture to it, an alertness that feels less like insomnia and more like instinct. She lay in the dark and listened. The base at night had its own sounds. The generators, the occasional footstep of a sentry, the far-off sound of aircraft that never quite resolved into something you could identify. She had learned all of these sounds over 8 months. She knew their normal rhythms and volumes and intervals. Yet at 02:30, she sat up. Something was different. She couldn't say what. Not yet. But the texture of the sound had changed in some way she couldn't precisely articulate, like a piece of music that's been playing in another room and has subtly, almost imperceptibly shifted key. She got up. She went to the small window. She looked out at the motor pool, at the vehicles lined up in their bays, at the perimeter fence 200 meters beyond, at the hills past that. Dark, still, normal. She went back to bed. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself she was letting 8 months of isolation and 2 weeks of strange emotional disruption make her paranoid. She told herself that tomorrow she would wake up at 05:30, go to the range, collect brass, do her job, be invisible, be fine. She lay back down. She closed her eyes. And in the hills beyond the perimeter in the darkness and that she had stared into and found nothing, men who had been watching the base for 3 weeks were making their final preparations, checking their weapons, confirming their assignments, and waiting for the moment just a few hours away now when they would stop watching and start moving. The last quiet night had arrived. It just didn't know yet that it was the last one. Sarah Mitchell closed her eyes in the dark. Tomorrow, everything she had ever been and would be asked to prove that it still existed. She didn't know that yet either, but her body did, and her body was already awake. She was at the range by 05:15 that morning, 15 minutes earlier than usual. She hadn't planned it. Her body had simply refused to stay horizontal any longer. And rather than fight it, she had gotten up, pulled on her work clothes in the dark, clipped her badge to her chest pocket, and walked out into the pre-dawn air that was still cool enough to make her exhale visible. The range was empty. The flags were barely moving. The targets at the far end were gray silhouettes against a sky that hadn't fully decided what color it wanted to be yet. She set her bucket down at the 500-meter mark and stood there for a moment just breathing. Something still felt off. She couldn't name it, couldn't locate it in any specific sensory input. It was atmospheric, almost the way a room feels different after someone has left it, even if you didn't see them go. A quality of absence that should have been presence. She shook it off, started her sweep, moved with her usual rhythm, low and quiet, working the brass line from far to near. At 5:40, she heard the first vehicle arrive at the range parking area. That was early even for Walker. She glanced up. It wasn't Walker. It was Ortiz. Jason Ortiz, the spotter, moving fast across the gravel in a way that didn't match his usual loose-limbed arrival. He had his kit with him, which was normal, but he was scanning the perimeter as he walked, which was not. She watched him for 3 seconds. He didn't look at her. He pulled out a radio, said something she couldn't hear, listened, and his jaw tightened. Then he saw her. "Hey," he called across. "You Mitchell?" She straightened. "Yes." "Chief Walker wants you off the range by 0600 today, earlier if possible." He paused. "Actually now. He wants you off now." She looked at him. "Did something happen?" "Nothing you need to worry about. Just head to your quarters, lock your door, stay off the comms line." He was already turning away. "Now please." She picked up her bucket. She started moving. But she was watching him, watching the way he was moving, and she had spent 8 months learning to read this range and the people on it, and what she was reading right now had a name. It was called fear, not panic. Jason Ortiz was not a man who panicked. She had watched him call corrections under time pressure drills that would have broken most people, and he had never wavered. But this was something underneath confidence, something that confidence was working very hard to cover, and it wasn't quite winning. She was 50 meters from the range exit when she heard Walker's voice behind her. "Mitchell?" She stopped, turned. He was coming from the direction of the command building, and he was moving with that same economical speed she had learned to identify, but there was something in his face that she hadn't seen before. A compression, a tightening around the eyes that meant he was processing things faster than the visible world was providing them. "You didn't leave," he said. "I was leaving." Good." He came level with her and stopped. He looked at her for one full second, not the evaluating look she was used to, but something more urgent. "Go to the motor pool building, the far bay, the one on the northeast corner. There's a group of civilian contractors and base support staff that have been directed there. Go with them and stay low." "What's happening?" "We don't know yet." His voice was flat and controlled. "Possibly nothing, probably not nothing." He looked at her face. "Can you follow that instruction?" "Yes," she said. He held her gaze for another beat. "I know you can read this range better than some of my guys," he said quietly. "I need you to read this situation the same way. Whatever happens, stay inside, stay down, stay quiet." Then he was gone, moving at that same precise pace toward the range command post, and she was standing alone with a brass collection bucket in her hand and a feeling in her gut that had graduated from unease to something much colder and more specific. She walked toward the motor pool. She did not run. Running was what you did when the threat was visible. Walking was what you did when the threat was still forming, when panic would cost you more than composure. Her father had taught her that too. He had taught her many things. Most of them she was beginning to understand had been preparing her for something he could never have anticipated. She was 200 meters from the motor pool building when the first mortar round hit. The sound was not what she had expected. She had heard explosions in movies on television, in the compressed audio world of a screen where everything is dramatic and clean. This was none of those things. This was a physical concussion, a pressure wave that hit her in the chest before the sound reached her ears, that snapped her head back and made her vision stutter for one terrible half second. Then the sound arrived, a cracking, tearing, expanding roar that seemed to come from inside her skull rather than from a point in space. She was on the ground. She didn't remember falling. The bucket was gone, somewhere rolling. She could hear the metallic rattle of it distantly, absurdly beneath the ringing in her ears. She got her hands under her and pushed up. Her palms were bleeding where the gravel had caught them. She didn't feel it yet. That would come later. Right now, there was only the processing, the animal triage that her nervous system was running without her conscious participation. Up, she needed to be up. The second round hit before she got to her knees. This one was closer, much closer. The flash shadow of it crossed the ground to her left, and the pressure this time was not a push, but a slap. Something that hit her sideways and sent her back down with her left ear full of a high, pure tone that had no place in the real world. She pressed herself flat. Instinct again. Flat was right. Flat was what you did when ordnance was falling and you didn't have cover yet. From her position on the ground, she could see the motor pool building 60 meters ahead. She could see people running, base support staff, contractors. She caught a glimpse of a woman in a blue utility vest running for the building's bay doors. She could hear shouting that her wrecked ears were translating into a kind of underwater mumbling. She started crawling. She was not thinking anymore, not in language. She was operating on something older and simpler than thought, something that knew the motor pool building was cover, and the open ground between here and there was exposure, and the math was simple. Move. Move now. A third round, further away. Toward the command building, she thought, but she was not certain of direction anymore. The echoes were scrambling everything. She made it to the bay doors. Someone grabbed her arm, a man stocky wearing a hard hat civilian maintenance, and pulled her inside. She let herself be pulled. She got her feet under her, got upright, got her back against the interior wall. The man who'd grabbed her was saying something. She watched his mouth, caught maybe every third word. Her hearing was coming back slowly like a radio being tuned through static. "Okay, are you hurt? Hey, can you—" "I'm fine," she said. The words felt strange in her mouth, oversized. "I'm fine, I'm okay." But she was shaking. She could feel it in her hands and in the backs of her knees, that full-body tremor. That isn't fear exactly, or isn't only fear, but is the body's acknowledgement that something has changed, that the world has shifted into a register it was not prepared for. 20 people in this bay, maybe more. Contractors, support staff, a couple of local nationals who worked in the base kitchen. One woman she recognized from the communications annex. All pressed against the walls, all doing what Walker had said, staying low, staying quiet, or trying to. One man near the back was hyperventilating. She could see it even if she couldn't hear it properly, yet the rapid chest movement, the white knuckles. Another round hit. The building shook. Dust came from the ceiling in a fine curtain. The man near the back started to make a sound. Without thinking, Sarah crossed the bay. She crouched next to him. She put her hand on his forearm, not grabbing, just placing. She had no idea why she did this. It was not a decision. "Hey," she said, "look at me." He looked at her. His eyes were all whites and negligent. "What's your name, Davis?" "Marcus Davis. I work in—" "Marcus?" She kept her voice even, kept her hand steady on his arm. "I need you to breathe with me. In for 4 counts. Okay, count with me. 1, 2, 3, 4. He was trying. His chest was working against him, but he was trying. Now out. 1, 2, 3, 4. Another round, more distant. She felt Marcus's arm tighten under her hand, and she pressed slightly more firmly and kept counting. She did not know where this was coming from. She had never done anything like it. But something in the extremity of the situation had stripped away everything she usually used to keep herself contained and separate, and what was underneath was apparently someone who knew how to stay calm and who needed other people to know it. "You're doing fine," she said to Marcus. "You're doing really fine." She believed it when she said it. That was the strange thing. She was terrified. Her own pulse was running at what felt like 150, and her hands were bloody, and her left ear was still half full of that high tone. But underneath the terror was something steady, something that had always been there and was only now getting enough oxygen to breathe. She was not fine, but she was functional. And in this moment, that was the whole game. Then the bay door at the far end crashed open, and Ryan Walker came through it, and the world reorganized itself around his presence the way it always did, and Sarah Mitchell felt something she had not expected. Relief so total, it was almost violent. Walker had blood on his left arm. His sleeve was dark with it from the elbow down, and he was holding that arm close to his body in a way that meant he was managing it, not ignoring it. Behind him came Ortiz, and behind Ortiz came two other members of the unit, Torres, the young shooter, whose trigger break she had watched improve last Tuesday, and a big, quiet man she knew only as Reese. Walker scanned the bay. His eyes moved across every face the way a physician takes a room, fast, comprehensive, filing information. When his eyes reached Sarah, they stopped for exactly 1 second. Then he moved to the center of the space. "Listen up," he said. Not loud. He didn't need loud. The quality of his voice was such that it filled space without volume the way certain instruments do. "Here's what we know. We have a coordinated attack mortars plus infantry elements. They've breached the perimeter on the northeast side." He paused, letting that land. "Comms to the main operations center are intermittent. Air support has been requested. ETA is not confirmed. We are holding this position until we get a clear channel or until the QRF arrives." He looked around. "You are all safe in this building as long as we maintain our position. I need everyone calm on the floor away from the doors and windows. Civilians stay interior. That is not optional." The man named Davis had stopped hyperventilating. He was listening. That was what a credible voice of authority did. It gave people somewhere to put their fear that was more organized than panic. Then Ortiz came to Walker's side and said something Sarah couldn't hear. Walker's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes did. "Say again." "Nin," Walker said very quietly. Ortiz said it again. Walker turned. He looked toward the range that was 200 meters from this building, the range where they had been training every morning for 8 months, the range with the firing platforms and the flagpoles and the clear lines of sight. "How many?" Walker said. "Mortar team confirmed northeast of the range, approximately 650 meters, plus at least one additional fire team pushing toward the gate." Ortiz's voice was low and rapid and precise. "Sir, if they get the mortar team repositioned to the south ridge, they will have direct angle on this building and on the command post. We have maybe 20 minutes before that happens. And the shooter on Overwatch," Ortiz hesitated. "Unconfirmed, possibly." Walker said nothing for 3 full seconds. In a man like Walker, 3 seconds of silence was a significant event. Sarah counted them without knowing she was doing it. Then he looked across the bay, directly at her. "Mitchell," he said. Every person in the bay turned to look at her. She was still crouched next to Marcus Davis with her bloody palms on her thighs. She straightened. "Sir." Walker crossed to her. He stopped 2 feet away. He looked at her the way he had looked at the range that first morning she had ever seen him reading it, assessing it, making calculations that only he could see. "I need to ask you something," he said, "and I need a completely honest answer. Not the answer you think I want, not the answer that sounds right, the actual truth." She held his gaze. "Okay, if I put a rifle in your hands right now, a rifle you've never shot before in conditions you've never trained in, do you have the capability to put rounds on target at 600 to 700 meters? The bay was very quiet. She could feel every set of eyes on her. She could hear Marcus Davis breathing slowly now, controlled the breathing she had coached him into, and she could hear the distant, irregular percussion of the engagement continuing outside, and she could hear her own heartbeat in a way that was so specific and present, it was almost embarrassing. She thought about lying, not out of cowardice, out of honesty, because the honest answer was complicated. "I don't know what I'm capable of under combat conditions," she said. "I've never been in combat. I haven't fired a weapon competitively in 12 years. She paused. "But I know the mechanics. I know wind. I know position. I know how to breathe through a shot." Another pause. "I'm not your first choice." "I know that," Walker said immediately. "I need to know if you're a viable option." She looked at him. She thought about her father's voice, about the range at dawn, about 12 years of watching from a distance and never once forgetting what she knew. Yes, she said, I'm a viable option. Walker nodded once. The calculation was complete. Ortiz, he said, not looking away from her, get her the MK-13. Now. The sound that moved through the bay at that moment was not quite speech and not quite silence. It was the sound of 20 people absorbing something they hadn't expected and didn't know how to categorize. Young Torres, whose trigger break she had watched click into place last Tuesday, said very quietly, Chief, she's a civilian. She is, Walker said. He still hadn't looked away from Sarah. And she's what we have. Ortiz was already moving. He came back with the rifle in 30 seconds, the MK-13 long and precise and heavier than it looked, and she had watched this specific weapon be carried and deployed and maintained for 8 months, and she had never once touched it. He held it out to her. Her hands were still bleeding. She wiped them on her work pants. She took the rifle. The weight of it was correct. That was the word her body produced. Not heavy, not light. Correct. Like something that had been waiting for a specific set of hands and had found them. She checked the action without being asked. Muscle memory that had been asleep for 12 years woke up in about 4 seconds. She knows how to handle it, Ortiz said, and there was something in his voice that sounded almost like wonder. Walker was already pulling on his kit with his good arm, managing his wounded side with the practiced economy of a man who had been injured before and had developed systems for continuing regardless. He looked at Sarah. We're going to move to the range command post. It has the highest ground angle on the northeast sector. Ortiz will spot for you. You listen to him the way you've been listening to him for 8 months, you understand? You call what you hear. You trust what you know. And if I miss, she said. Walker looked at her. His expression did not soften and it did not harden. It simply acknowledged the question for what it was, not fear, but clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when a person has stopped pretending there are safe outcomes and has started calculating real ones. Then we try again, he said, until we can't. She absorbed that. She nodded. One more thing, Walker said. He stepped slightly closer, lowering his voice so it was between the two of them. Whatever happened before, whatever you think you lost, whatever reason you have been invisible on this range for 8 months. He held her gaze. It's time to stop being invisible. She wanted to say something. There were several things she might have said, things about her father, about Montana, about paper targets and cold mornings and a life she had once believed was hers and then had let herself believe was gone. She wanted to say all of those things. Instead, she said, let's go. Walker allowed himself the smallest fraction of something that might in another context have been called a smile. Then he turned to Torres and Reese. Cover formation, standard spacing. We move in 60 seconds. He looked at Ortiz. You stay on her left. Talk her through everything. Do not stop talking. Understood, Ortiz said. He glanced at Sarah. You ready? Outside, something large and structural collapsed to sound like an entire building deciding to sit down. The mortar team was adjusting. They were getting their range. They had maybe 15 minutes. Sarah Mitchell tightened her grip on the rifle she had watched other men carry for 8 months. She took one breath in, felt it fill her, let it out slow. Ready, she said. And the woman who had spent 8 months being invisible stepped toward the door and walked back out into the war. The move from the motor pool to the range command post took 4 minutes in 11 seconds. She knew this because Ortiz counted it. Not out loud, he counted it the way trained men count things in the field internally, with a part of the brain that never stops running the clock, even when the rest of it is managing terrain and threat angles and the sound of small arms fire that had now started up from the direction of the northeast perimeter. Sarah knew he was counting because she was counting too. Walker led, Torres and Reese flanked. Ortiz stayed on her left shoulder exactly as Walker had instructed, and Sarah moved with the rifle held close to her body muzzle, down both hands on it, her work boots finding the same ground she had crossed 100 times in daylight, but which felt entirely different now. Not because it had changed, but because Yahweh had. The small arms fire was not directed at them. Not yet. It was coming from the breach point on the northeast side, and based on the sound signature, she was processing this without consciously choosing, to the way you process grammar in your native language, without thinking about rules. It was a sustained exchange, which meant the base's security element had engaged and was holding, which meant they had time but not much. When they reached the range command post, a low reinforced structure at the northern end of the range that housed spotting scopes and a communications relay, Walker pushed through the door first and cleared it in 3 seconds flat, despite the wound in his arm, and then waved them in. Sarah came through the door and immediately went to the forward observation slot. It was a horizontal aperture about 8 inches tall and 2 feet wide, angled toward the northeast. She had never looked through it from the inside before. She had always been on the other side of this building. The view it provided was comprehensive. She could see the entire northeast quadrant of the base's exterior, the broken terrain beyond the fence line, and 2 flag reference points that she had been watching from the other direction for 8 months. She knew exactly what the wind was doing. She had known since she walked out of the motor pool. 6.2 miles per hour left to right, slight variance at mid-range due to the ridge break, she said. Ortiz looked at her. I haven't called anything yet. I know, she said. I'm telling you what I'm seeing. A beat. Ortiz looked at Walker. Walker said, Is she right? Ortiz checked his kestrel. He looked up. Something moved in his face. She's within half a mile per hour. Walker said nothing. He pressed himself against the wall to her right, managing his arm, watching her. Get into position, Ortiz said to her. Not challenging anymore. Something had shifted in his voice. Let's find the mortar team. She went prone on the concrete floor behind the observation slot. The MK-13 came up into her shoulder, and the feeling of it, the specific pressure of the stock against the curve of her shoulder, the way her cheek found the correct weld on the stock, the way the scope came to her eye was so familiar it was almost unbearable. Not because it was uncomfortable, because it was the opposite. Because her body remembered this position the way it remembers swimming or riding a bicycle, the deep cellular memory that never fully goes away, no matter how long you stay out of the water. Her father had drilled her on position for years. Get it right or don't get in it at all. Position is the foundation. Everything else is arithmetic. She got it right. Natural point of aim confirmed, she said quietly, and she wasn't sure if she was talking to Ortiz or to herself or to some memory of a man with patient hands who had first taught her that phrase in a field in Montana 22 years ago. Copy, Ortiz said. He was on the spotting scope. Scanning northeast. Range to the ridgeline is approximately 680. I see the ridge. Mortar team should be in defilade just below the crest. Look for movement. Look for the tube signature. She was already looking. This was what she had been doing for 8 months, not consciously, not with intent, but by nature. She looked at space the way a trained shooter looks at it, in layers near to far static elements. First, then movement at the brain's pattern, recognition, running its filter continuously. 10 o'clock from the ridge center, she said. There's a disturbance, ground level, something moved. Ortiz adjusted his scope. 3 seconds. I see it. His voice had changed again, tighter now, more clipped. Field voice. The voice she had heard him use in training when the drill went live. Confirm 2 personnel, 1 tube. They're setting up for another volley. Walker said from the wall, range. 665, Ortiz said. Mom, I'm on a correction. Ortiz looked at Sarah. Sarah said 0.8 mil right, elevation up 2/10. Ortiz read his own data. He looked at her again with that expression she was starting to recognize, the one that was recalculating something it had already filed as known. Confirmed, he said. Take the shot when ready, Walker said. The world went very quiet inside Sarah Mitchell's head. Not the external world. Outside, the small arms fire continued, and somewhere to the south, a vehicle alarm was going off in a rhythmic, idiotic pulse, and she could hear Walker's breathing and Ortiz's breathing and the very faint sound of Torres at the door monitoring. All of that was there. All of that was real. But inside was the silence her father had taught her to find. The silence that isn't an absence of things, but a presence of focus, the narrowing, the tunnel, the world reduced to its most essential geometry, the target, the distance, the wind, the breathing. She breathed in, slow. She breathed out, slower. At the bottom of her exhale, in the natural respiratory pause where the body is momentarily still, she broke the trigger. The rifle fired. Through the scope, she saw the result immediately. The impact 665 meters away was not center mass, but it was not a miss either. It hit the near edge of the mortar team's position, and both figures dropped from view. Impact, Ortiz said. Left edge .3 mil. Possible hit on secondary operator. Tube is still up. Correction, Sarah said. Already. She was already running it. Add .3 right. Confirmed. She was already cycling. Already repositioning. The bolt action of the MK13 came back and forward with a mechanical certainty that felt like the rifle was participating in the process, like it had decided to cooperate. And she found the position again, cheek-weld natural point breathing. The second shot broke. Hit, Ortiz said, and his voice on that single word was the flattest, most unadorned sound she had ever heard a human being produce, stripped of everything except information. Confirmed hit, tube operator down, remaining personnel moving. Direction west, they're pulling back. A pause. Mortar threat is neutralized. The silence that followed inside the command post was approximately 3 seconds long. Then Walker said very quietly, "Good shot." 2 words, that was all. But the weight behind them, the full understanding of what had just happened, what she had just done, what it meant was in both of them, and she received them the way she received the rifle's recoil directly, completely without flinching. She stayed in position. She did not celebrate. Celebration was not what this moment called for, and somewhere deep in the trained part of her, she knew that a threat neutralized was not a battle won. It was a threat neutralized. The next one was already forming. "What else?" she said. Ortiz was already scanning. "Hold position. I'm reading movement south of the breach point." He adjusted. "Vehicle, armed personnel dismounting. I count 5, 6, 8. They have an RPG team far right element." Walker said, "Range to the gate." "Gate is 340 from our position," Ortiz said. "RPG team is currently at 290, moving toward the gate on an angle. Time to gate breach. 2 minutes, maybe less." Walker looked at Sarah. She was already adjusting natural point elevation, cycling the calculation. The distance was shorter now, which meant less wind drift, which meant her primary variable was hold off for the moving element. "They're moving," she said. "I need a pace count." "On it," Ortiz said. He watched through the scope, counting the rhythm of the RPG team's movement. "Call it 4 miles per hour consistent." She ran the lead calculation. Her father had drilled her on moving targets at 14. She had hated it. Then the math was harder, the variables more dynamic, the margin for error compressible to almost nothing. He had made her run the calculation until it was reflex, until it happened below the level of conscious thought, because he had understood something she was only now fully appreciating. You never know what you'll be shooting at. You only know what you know. So you learn everything. "Ready," she said. "Take the RPG team first," Walker said. "Right to left. Far operator." She found him in the scope, moving. She let her eye track his pace, let her brain set the lead, let everything her father had given her 20 years ago do what it was built to do. The shot broke. Hit, RPG operator down. Ortiz's voice clipped. Immediate. Second operator picking up the tube. She was already cycling. "I see him. He's turning." The shot broke. Hit. Second operator down. Tube is grounded. A half beat. Remaining 6 personnel are breaking right, seeking cover. From behind her, Torres said something that she didn't fully catch, not to anyone specifically, more of an exhaled word that wasn't quite speech. She thought it might have been her name. Walker said, "Reese, get me a comms update." Reese moved to the communications panel at the back of the room. Sarah heard him working the radio, heard the burst of static and the fragmented transmission that came through, heard Reese's clipped responses. She did not turn around. She kept her eye on the scope. She kept scanning. Because she knew. The way she had known this morning at 0230 when she sat up in the dark and went to the window. She knew that there was more. The attack was too coordinated, too professional for the mortar team and the RPG element to be the full picture. Somebody had planned this. Somebody had studied this base, its layout, its response patterns, its sight lines. Somebody had thought about what would happen after the mortar team was neutralized. "Ortiz," she said, "northeast ridge, higher than the mortar position. Is there a secondary elevated point?" Ortiz moved his scope without question. She had earned that the absence of the skeptical paused the automatic response. He was treating her the way he would treat a veteran spotter's call. "There's a rock formation," he said, 20 meters above and slightly east of the mortar position. "Natural hide." He was quiet for 2 seconds. Sarah, there's a glint. Optic signature. The cold thing that moved through her at that moment was not fear. She had moved past fear several minutes ago into a country that didn't have a common name, but that she understood instinctively. It was the country of pure function, of doing the thing because the thing must be done. Sniper, she said. Confirmed, Ortiz said. 700 meters. He has angles on this position. Walker's voice immediately. Do not silhouette. Everyone stay away from the aperture edges. He hasn't fired yet, Sarah said. Why hasn't he fired? A beat. Ortiz said he's waiting. He's got a target he wants more than a random shot. She understood what that meant. The command post, the communications relay, or he's waiting for someone to move, Walker said from the wall. His voice was completely level. He knows we're in here. He's waiting for extraction, evacuation movement, something that gives him a cluster. So we're pinned, Torres said. We're pinned, Walker confirmed, until we're not. Sarah's mind was already working the problem. 700 meters, optic signature confirmed, which meant she had approximately the same information about him that he had about this position. He was in a natural hide, which meant his approach angle was probably fixed. He had chosen the position for the sight line, which meant there were things he couldn't see from there. His hide, she said. What's the angle on the east face of that rock formation? Can he see the secondary observation slot on the east wall of this building? Ortiz thought for exactly 1 second. Negative. The formation blocks his angle to the east face. So if someone appears in the east slot, he can't take that shot without repositioning. And if he repositions, he exposes his right side. Ortiz was ahead of her now, running the same geometry. He has to move at least 2 meters east to get angle on the east slot. When he does, he breaks from defilade. He stopped. Then, that's the window. Walker said, what are you proposing? Sarah said, a decoy. Something in the east slot draws him out. When he repositions, I take the shot from here. The silence in the room was not empty. It was full of calculation of every person present, running the numbers and the risks and the probabilities. Walker said the decoy takes risk. Yes, Sarah said. If the timing is off by a second, I know. Another silence. Then Torres said from the door, I'll do it. Everyone looked at him. I'm the fastest mover in this unit, Torres said. He looked at Walker. You know that, sir? I get to the east slot, I show enough to draw his reposition. I drop below the sill before he can settle. Sarah gets the window. Walker looked at Torres for a long moment. Then he looked at Sarah. If he repositions, and I call it, Ortiz said to Sarah, how long do you need? 1 breath, she said. Half a second. Ortiz looked at Walker. Walker said, Torres, you flash and drop. You do not hold. You understand me. You are not a hero in that slot. You show and you disappear. Yes, sir. Mitchell. Walker looked at her. Everything you know, everything you've learned, it's right now. She looked back at him. She thought about her father. She thought about the range at dawn, about 8 months of watching, about 12 years of silence that had somehow incomprehensibly been preparation. She thought about that first shot 2 minutes ago and the way the rifle had felt correct in her hands. She thought about the word her father used to say before a difficult shot. Not a prayer, not a mantra, just a reminder. A single word that meant be here, be honest, be exactly what you are. She said it now inside her head. Just once, well. I'm ready, she said aloud. Walker gave Torres the nod. Torres moved, fast and low exactly as described, crossing the interior of the command post to the east observation slot. He rose to the sill for 1 second, 1 count visible in the aperture, a shape a human silhouette that anyone watching from the ridge would register as a target. Then he dropped. Ortiz was watching the ridge. Sarah was in position, eye in the scope on the rock formation on the hide waiting. He's moving, Ortiz said. 2 words, clipped, immediate. She saw it. The shift. The 2-meter repositioning the right side of the hide, breaking into exposure, the man behind the rifle losing his defilade as he moved to find the angle on the east slot. In that moment, she saw him. Not a target, a man. A man doing exactly what she was doing, repositioning, calculating, using his training. And then she stopped thinking about what he was and thought only about what she had to do. 1 breath, in, out, bottom of the exhale. The shot broke. 700 meters away, the enemy snipers, repositioning, stopped. Hit, Ortiz said. His voice did not rise. It did not waver. It delivered the word the way a fact is delivered, without editorializing, without drama, with only the specific weight of truth. Sarah did not move from position for 3 full seconds. She kept her eye in the scope. She kept scanning. Because that was right, that was what you did. Then she took her eye from the scope and she pressed her forehead against the back of her hand on the stock. And she breathed. Just breathed. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Reese said from the communications panel, "Sir, I've got QRF on the line. Air support confirmed ETA 12 minutes. Walker said, "Copy." He looked at Sarah. His arm was still bleeding. He hadn't mentioned it once in the last 20 minutes. "Can you hold this position for 12 more minutes?" She lifted her head. She found his eyes. She thought about 12 years, about the life she had stopped believing was hers, about a rifle in her hands that felt like coming home. "Yes," she said, and outside the battle continued. But inside of the range command post, in a space that smelled of concrete and gun oil, and the specific electricity of people under extreme pressure, something had changed that was not going to change back. Sarah Mitchell had shot a rifle for the first time in 12 years. She had not missed, and she was not done. 12 minutes. That was what Reese had said. Air support in 12 minutes. It sounded short, it sounded manageable. But Sarah had been in this command post long enough now to understand that 12 minutes in a sustained firefight was not a unit of time the way 12 minutes in an ordinary life was a unit of time. It was elastic. It stretched and compressed based on threat density and decision speed and the specific cruelty of whatever the next 240 seconds decided to bring. She stayed in position, eye in the scope, scanning. Ortiz was beside her, working his spotting scope with the steady, methodical rhythm she had memorized from 40 meters away over 8 months of mornings. He called terrain features as he swept. Not targets yet, just anchoring her, giving her a shared map of the space so that when he called something, she would already know the geography. She appreciated that. It was exactly what a good spotter did for a shooter who was new to the position. He was treating her like a professional. She was trying to deserve it. Walker had moved to the communications panel with Reese. She could hear fragments of conversation behind her, call signs, grid references, the clipped military shorthand that she understood in outline, if not in every detail. What she could hear told her enough. The QRF was moving, air support was confirmed, but the northeast breach was still active, and there was a secondary element, the group that had broken right after she dropped the RPG team that had not been reacquired. 8 personnel, armed, in cover somewhere between the breach point and the motor pool. 8 personnel who knew their sniper was gone and their mortar team was neutralized, and who were now operating on whatever contingency plan their commander had given them for when the primary assault went wrong. That was the dangerous kind of personnel, not the ones executing a plan, the ones improvising after the plan had failed. Because improvisation in trained fighters was unpredictable in ways that a structured assault was not. "Ortiz," she said quietly. "I know," he said. He was already adjusting his scope toward the motor pool sector. "I'm looking." Torres had moved back to the door after the decoy action. He had said nothing about it afterward, not about the risk, not about what it felt like to stand in an aperture with an enemy sniper 700 meters away, making a targeting decision. He had just moved back to his position and continued doing his job. She found that impressive in a way she couldn't fully articulate. Reese said from behind her, "Chief, QRF element is 6 minutes out. They're coming in from the south access road." Walker said, "What's the status on the northeast breach?" "Security element has pushed them back to the fence line. Breach is contained but not cleared. The 8 from the RPG group, no reacquisition." Walker came forward. He crouched beside Sarah on her right side. His wounded arm was pressed close to his body, and she could see the fabric of his sleeve was very dark now, soaked through in a way that meant the bleeding had not stopped. She wanted to say something about that. She didn't. He would not have thanked her for it. "South perimeter," he said to her quietly. "If those 8 are smart, and they've been smart so far, they're trying to loop around to the south and come in behind the QRF. Trying to catch them between 2 elements," she said. "Yes. From the south, what's the angle from this position?" He looked at the observation slot. "Partial. You'd need to move to the exterior." The word exterior landed in the room with a particular weight. Exterior meant exposed. Exterior meant no concrete walls between her and whatever was still out there. Exterior meant the same open ground she had crossed 25 minutes ago when the world was beginning to fall apart, except this time she would not be crossing it at a low run. She would be stationary, in a prone position, visible. She processed this. If the 8 are moving south, she said, what's their timeline to intercept the QRF? Walker looked at Torres. Torres said, if they're moving now and they know the south access road, 4 minutes, maybe 5. Walker looked at Sarah. She understood what he was not saying. He would not order her to do this. She was a civilian. She was not under his command in any binding sense. He had asked her twice already, and she had said yes both times, and both times had been her choice. This time he was presenting the information and waiting. She thought about the 20 people in the motor pool building. She thought about Marcus Davis counting his breaths. She thought about the QRF vehicle coming down the south access road in 5 minutes, and the 8 trained fighters waiting to hit it from the flank, and what that would mean. She thought about what her father would have said. He would not have made it complicated. That was one of his great gifts, the ability to see through the complexity to the simple, hard center of a thing. You can make the shot, or you can't. If you can and you don't, that's a choice too. Know which choice you are making. Tell me the best exterior position for the south angle, she said. Walker told her. She listened. She asked 2 clarifying questions about the approach route and the available cover at the position. He answered both without hesitation. Then she stood up, kept the rifle close, and said, Ortiz. Right here, Ortiz said. He was already moving. Torres looked at Walker. Something passed between them, the kind of communication that happens between people who have been through enough together that language is mostly ceremonial. Torres said, I've got the door. Walker said, hold until I'm back. He looked at Sarah. I'm going with you. Your arm is not your concern right now, he said. Flat, final, not unkind. Move. They went out the east door, the one the enemy sniper could not have covered. From his position, the one that opened onto the narrow strip of ground between the command post and the range's secondary berm. Walker led. She followed. Ortiz came behind her. They moved fast and low and without speaking because they had already said what needed to be said. The exterior position Walker had described was at the south corner of the secondary berm, a raised earthen wall that the range used as a backstop for lateral safety. From the top of that berm, she would have a direct sight line to the south access road and the approach ground on both sides of it. She would also be fully exposed to anything coming from the south. She understood this. She accepted. Acceptance was not the same as comfort. They reached the berm. She went up the back face in 3 quick movements, keeping below the crest until she was in position. Then she came forward into the prone and the scope came to her eye, and she was on the south sector. I need a reference point, she said. Gate post at the south fence, Ortiz said, setting up beside her. 160 meters. The access road runs left to right from there. She found the gate post, adjusted her natural point of aim to cover the road approach. I'm on it. QRF is 4 minutes, Walker said behind her. He had his radio to his mouth, coordinating, keeping the picture current. Ortiz was scanning the ground south and east of the road. Nothing yet, he said. The seconds stretched. The ambient sound of the engagement reduced now from the peak of the initial assault, but still present, still irregular, provided a kind of terrible soundtrack to the waiting. Waiting was hard. Waiting in a prone position with a rifle and a ticking clock was its own kind of discipline, and it was one that her father had also prepared her for, though she had not known that was what he was doing at the time. Hold still when you're waiting, he had told her. The rifle knows when you're impatient. The shot knows us. She held still. Then Ortiz said, movement. East of the road, 80 meters south of the gate. He stopped. I've got 4. Moving fast. Low. 4, she said. Where are the other 4? Still looking. Walker said something into the radio. She heard the response, the QRF element, distance road position, 2 minutes. Ortiz, she said. Where are the other 4? West side, he said. I see them. West of the road, slightly further south. They were going to cross and hit from both sides simultaneously. Classic ambush geometry. She understood it. They're waiting for the vehicles to commit to the road before they move. Yes, Ortiz said. So we have a window right now before the vehicles get to the gate when they're still staged. Give me the east group, far left of the east group. 400 meters, moving element heading north pace. He watched. Call it 3.5 miles per hour. She ran the lead. Set the hold. Let her breathing find the rhythm. First mover, she said. On your call, Ortiz said. She broke the shot. Hit. First mover down. East group is stopping. They're looking. She was already cycling. Second mover, he's turning. He's turning right, trying to go to ground. The shot broke. Hit. Second mover down. Ortiz's voice had shifted into a register she had never heard from him before, not in 8 months of training, not in the last 30 minutes of combat. It was pure velocity, words stripped to their functional minimum, delivered at the speed the situation required. East group is broken. Remaining 2 are running. Let them run, Walker said immediately. West group, they'll move now. West group is moving, Ortiz said. They're committed, they see the East group is gone, and they're trying to push before the QRF arrives. 4 movers west of road heading north, 380 meters. 380, shorter, less wind drift, more pace variation because they were moving faster now. Not a steady tactical approach, but an accelerated push urgency overriding discipline, which was what happened when a plan started to collapse, and the people executing it knew it. Far right, Ortiz said, he's got the RPG. She found him. The 4th man in the West group carrying the 2 moving at the edge of the formation. She broke the shot. Hit, RP, G neutralized. Half a second. Third mover is breaking left. She cycled. I see him. The shot broke. Hit. A pause that was less than a second but felt longer. West group is broken. All 4 are down or running. Ortiz exhaled a single controlled breath that was the most human sound she had heard from him in the last 10 minutes. Road is clear. Walker keyed his radio. QRF, this is Walker. South road is clear. Repeat, south approach is clear. Proceed with access. The response crackled through immediately. 30 seconds out. Sarah stayed in position. Scanning. Her breathing was elevated. She could feel it. Her body finally presenting the bill for the last 40 minutes. But her hands were steady. Her eye was steady. She kept the scope moving in the methodical sweep that Ortiz had modeled for her and that she had absorbed somewhere in the last half hour as completely as if she had been doing it for years. Because in some form she had. From behind her, Walker said quietly enough that it was meant only for her. How many is that? She had been counting. She didn't want to count. But she had been counting the way she counted everything automatically without deciding to. Confirmed hits, she said. 11, possibly 13. A silence. In 40 minutes, Walker said. She said nothing. Sarah. I know, she said. She did know. She knew what it meant. She knew what she had done, and she was not running from it, and she was not celebrating it, and she was not going to discuss it right now. Because if she opened that door while the situation was still active, she would not be able to close it again in time, and there was still work to do. The QRF vehicles came through the south gate with a sound like organized relief engines and armor, and the radio communications of a dozen additional personnel inserting into the situation with fresh resources and a current picture that Walker was already providing. She could hear him talking behind her rapid and precise handing off the tactical situation the way a surgeon hands off a procedure complete, competent, without ego. Torres and Reese had come out of the command post and were moving to link up with the QRF element. She could hear Torres's voice recognizable, even at distance, giving a situation update to someone she couldn't see. Then Ortiz said very quietly, Sarah. Something in the way he said her name made her go still. Northeast ridge, he said, high point, above the sniper hide. She moved her scope, found the ridge, climbed to the high point above the position she had fired on 20 minutes ago, and felt her blood go cold. There was a second hide, above and behind the first, and there was a man in it. And he had been there the whole time above the sniper she had engaged, watching, waiting, positioned where no one would look because no one expected a second tier. And he was not looking at the road or the QRF or the breach point. He was looking at this berm. He was looking at her. Ortiz, she said. Her voice came out completely even, and she had no idea how. He's got angle on us. I see him, Ortiz said. And for the first time since the attack began, she heard something in Ortiz's voice that was not professional control. It was something underneath it. Something that knew they were exposed and had no cover and no time for the kind of setup that this shot required. Range, she said. 820 meters, Ortiz said. He's Sarah. He's already got his firing solution. He's been watching us work. He knows exactly where we are. 820 meters. The longest shot she had taken today was 700. At 820, every variable magnified. Wind drift was greater. The correction window was narrower. The margin between a hit and a miss was smaller than anything she had worked with in the last 40 minutes. And the man in that hide had watched her take every one of those shots. He had learned her patterns. She understood in that moment something that reconfigured the entire last hour in her mind. The mortar team, the RPG element, the ambush on the South Road. These were not independent elements. They were a structure, a shaped plan. And at the top of that plan was this man, a commander, a shooter, someone who had placed himself where he could observe the entire engagement and was now deciding whether to take the shot he had been waiting for. Which meant he was patient, which meant he was good. She ran the calculation. 820. Wind was 3.4, still left to right, but it had shifted in the last 20 minutes. The afternoon thermal cycle was starting pulling differently at altitude than at range level. Wind at his elevation, she said to Ortiz, calling it 5.1 at the high point. Ortiz said, thermal differential, the ridge is heating. She adjusted. Elevation. Up 4/10. Copy. Behind her, Walker said, what have we got? He had heard the change in their voices. Second tier, Ortiz said. 820. He's got a beat on us. A beat. Walker said, can she take it? Neither of them answered for a second. Ortiz said, it's the hardest shot of the day. Walker said, Sarah. She was already in the calculation, already running the geometry, the wind model, the elevation, the hold. Already doing what her father had taught her, being honest with herself about what she was seeing, not what she wanted to see. She saw a shot she could make. She saw a shot she might miss. She saw 820 meters in a trained shooter who had been watching her for an hour and who was making his own calculation right now and who was going to fire within the next few seconds because patience had a limit and he was reaching his. I've got one window, she said. When he commits to his shot, when he's in his final breath cycle, he'll be still. That's the moment. That's also the moment he fires, Ortiz said. Yes. Sarah. I know what I'm saying, Ortiz. A silence that was very short and very full. Walker said nothing. He understood what she was describing. He had been there himself, the split-second window, where the only way to take the shot is to accept that the other person is taking theirs at the same moment. And what determines the outcome is not just accuracy, but speed and stillness, and the absolute refusal to hesitate. She found the hide in her scope. She found the man. She watched his position, the subtle micro-adjustments of a shooter settling in, making final corrections, building toward the respiratory pause at the bottom of his exhale. She watched him breathe. She matched his rhythm. Out, down, still. She felt the moment before he reached it, felt it in the way you feel a note before it's played, the anticipation of the silence after the last breath. She broke the trigger. The rifle fired. 820 meters away, the second-tier hide went still. Ortiz did not speak immediately. He was watching through the spotting scope with the intensity of a man watching for something he is not certain he will see. Then he said, hit. And then he said nothing more for 3 full seconds. And then Jason Ortiz, who had never in 8 months of training said anything that wasn't tactically necessary, said in a voice that was almost not his professional voice at all, my God, Sarah. She did not move from position. She breathed. She kept her eye in the scope, and she kept scanning, and she did not stop being the thing the situation required her to be, even though something enormous was happening inside her chest that she did not have a name for yet and might not have a name for a long time. Walker put his hand briefly on her shoulder. Just for a second, just the weight of it, contact acknowledgement, the wordless language of one person telling another that they have been witnessed. She felt it. She kept scanning. From the south, she could hear the QRF element fully deploying, now hear the organized rhythm of trained reinforcements, taking control of the situation. Hear the chatter of radio communication as the picture consolidated and the threat map narrowed, and the terrible arithmetic of the last 45 minutes began to resolve in the direction of something that might eventually be called survived. The firing had almost stopped. The quiet was coming back. Not the quiet of before, not the pre-dawn, pre-everything. Quiet she had stood in at 5:15 this morning with her bucket, and her invisible life. Something different, a harder quiet. A quieter that had been earned through things she had done in the last hour that she was going to have to find a way to live with. But she was alive, and so was Walker, and Ortiz, and Torres, and Reese. And 20 people in the motor pool building, including a man named Marcus Davis who had learned to breathe. She released her grip on the rifle. Not all the way, not setting it down, not surrendering the readiness, but enough to let the tension in her hands ease by a degree. She had been holding that rifle for 47 minutes. It felt like it had always been in her hands. It felt like it had been waiting for them. She heard the first helicopter before she saw it. The deep, organized thrum of a Black Hawk coming in from the south, followed seconds later by the different signature of an Apache lower and more purposeful, and the sound of both of them together was the most beautiful thing she had heard in her life. And she pressed her forehead briefly against the stock of the rifle and closed her eyes for 2 seconds. Just 2 seconds. Then she opened them, and she went back to scanning. Because they weren't done yet, and she was not ready to stop. The Apache came in low and fast, and the sound of it was the sound of the fight ending. Sarah heard the cannon fire first, the deep mechanical stutter of the 30mm that dissolved the last organized resistance at the northeast breach in approximately 8 seconds. Then the Black Hawk circling wide, inserting the additional QRF personnel at the south gate with the kind of coordinated precision that made everything the last hour had been looked from the outside like it had gone according to plan. It had not gone according to plan, but it had gone. She released the rifle fully and rolled onto her back on top of the berm and stared at the sky and let herself for approximately 10 seconds be a person who had just survived something instead of a person who was still managing it. 10 seconds. That was all she allowed. Then she sat up, checked the scope one final time, found nothing that required her attention, and stood. Her legs were shaking. She had not known that until she was standing. The shaking was not violent, not the visible trembling of someone falling apart, but it was there deep in the muscle, the body's delayed invoice for everything it had been asked to do in the last 53 minutes. She locked her knees, breathed through it, waited for it to pass. It passed. Ortiz was on his radio. Walker had moved 20 meters east to link up with the QRF element leader, and she could see him in conversation with a man she didn't recognize, taller, older, with the body language of someone who was receiving a situation report and processing it with visible urgency. Walker's wounded arm was still pressed to his body. He still hadn't mentioned it. She climbed down from the berm and stood on the flat ground and held the MK-13 close and waited. She was not sure what she was waiting for. That was the honest answer. The tactical situation had resolved. She could feel it in the drop in ambient tension, in the organized sound of the QRF working the perimeter, in the absence of incoming fire that had become over the last 53 minutes, so constant that its absence now felt like its own kind of sound. She was waiting because she didn't know what came next, because what came next was not a category she had ever been in before. Torres came up beside her. He didn't say anything immediately. He stood next to her, and they both watched Walker talking with the QRF leader, and after about 15 seconds, Torres said very quietly, "You okay?" She thought about that, gave it the consideration it deserved rather than the automatic response. "I don't know yet," she said. Torres nodded, like that was the right answer. "Me neither," he said, "and I've been doing this for 4 years." She looked at him. He was looking at Walker. His face was younger than it looked in the scope, younger than the competence he carried suggested, and right now it was doing the same thing her insides were doing, holding together something that was very full and very heavy and hadn't found its way to the surface yet. "That thing you did," she said, "in the east slot." "Don't," he said. "Torres, he stopped, exhaled. "I just want to make sure we're clear that you owe me absolutely nothing for that, and I'm not going to be weird about it, and we're never going to talk about how fast my heart was going in that slot. Ever." He paused. "Agreed." She felt something move in her chest that was the first thing resembling a smile she'd experienced in the last hour. "Agreed," she said. He nodded again, satisfied. "Good." He looked at the rifle in her hands. "For what it's worth," he said, "I've watched some of the best shooters in the world train on that range. What you just did—" He stopped himself, shook his head, didn't finish, walked back toward the QRF element. She watched him go. Then Walker was walking toward her, and beside him was the taller man she hadn't recognized, and behind that man were two others. She also didn't recognize, different patches, different bearing, and all of them were looking at her with an expression she had not seen directed at herself before. Not the evaluating look Walker had given her on the range in their early conversations. Not the skeptical assessment she'd read on Torres' face when Walker first handed her the rifle. Something else. Something that was past evaluation, because evaluation was what you did before you had data, and these men had just watched her produce approximately 53 minutes of data at a level that apparently required a recalibration of whatever they had thought they were looking at. Walker stopped 2 feet from her. "Oh, sir." "Sarah Mitchell," he said. "This is Colonel James Hargrove. He commands the task force this unit is attached to." Hargrove was 60 maybe, with gray at his temples, and eyes that had seen enough that they no longer bothered with unnecessary expression. He looked at her the way you look at something that doesn't fit the category you brought with you, and you know the category is what needs updating. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, "Chief Walker has been giving me a situation report." He paused. "He briefed me on your role in the last hour." She said nothing. She wasn't sure what the correct response was, so she held the silence and waited. "Walk me through it," Hargrove said. "From when you took the rifle." She blinked. "Sir." "From when you took the rifle," he said again. No impatience, no clarification. He wanted what he asked for. She walked him through it. She was precise ranges, corrections, call sequence, decision points. She did not editorialize. She did not minimize or inflate. She described what she had seen and what she had done and why she had done it in the way that she had. And as she talked, she noticed that Hargrove's two companions were both taking notes, and that Hargrove himself was listening with a specific quality of attention that meant he was not just hearing her words, but filing them against other information he already had. When she finished, Hargrove was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How many confirmed?" She said the number. He held her gaze. "In under an hour, with a weapon system you'd never fired before, in a combat environment you'd had no training for." "Yes, sir." "And you've had no military service?" "No, sir." "But you shot competitively from age 7 to 19. She felt Walker's eyes on her and understood that he had already given Hargrove the background and that this was not an interrogation, it was a confirmation sequence. Hargrove was checking her account against Walker's account, seeing where they matched. "Yes, sir." Hargrove looked at Walker. Something passed between them that was entirely silent and entirely legible to both of them and only partially legible to her. Then Hargrove looked back at Sarah. "I'm going to need a full debrief," he said. "Written and verbal. My intelligence officer will conduct it this afternoon." He paused. "You are not in any trouble, Ms. Mitchell. I want to be clear about that. What you did today preserved this base and the lives of everyone on it. That is documented and it will be recognized." "Thank you, sir," she said. The words came out automatic, correct. Hargrove looked at her for one more moment. Then he looked at Walker again and gave him a nod that was the kind of nod that contains a full paragraph, and walked back toward the QRF element with his two companions. Walker watched him go. Then he turned back to Sarah. "Your arm," she said. "I know. You need to have someone look at it." "I know that too." He glanced down at it. "Medics setting up a treatment point near the motor pool. I'll get there." He looked at her. "In a minute." She understood that meant he had something to say first. "How are you?" he asked. The question was so simple and so direct that it landed differently than she expected. Not clinical, not tactical. Just how are you? The question one person asks another when they actually want to know the answer and are willing to wait for the honest one. She thought about what was happening inside her. She tried to find language for it. The shaking in her legs had stopped. The high, pure tone in her left ear from the initial mortar blasts had mostly faded. The bleeding on her palms from the gravel had dried and crusted, and she had not thought about her hands once in the last 50 minutes, which told her something about what the body was capable of when it had somewhere more important to put its attention. What she felt underneath all of it, underneath the adrenaline residue, in the beginning of a headache that she suspected was going to become significant in about an hour, was something she did not have a clean word for. Not relief, not pride, not grief, though there was something in the neighborhood of grief in there too. Something about what she had done and what it had cost and what it had proved about who she still was. I'm going to need some time to figure that out, she said. But right now, I think I'm okay. Walker nodded. That's an honest answer. You told me to be honest. I did. He looked at the rifle in her hands. You can set that down, you know. You don't have to keep holding it. She looked down. She had been holding it continuously for almost an hour. She had not consciously chosen to keep holding it. It had simply not occurred to her to set it down the way you don't set down something that has become in an hour more integrated into your sense of what you're doing than any object you've ever held. She held it out to him. He took it. And the moment she released it, something shifted, not a bad shift, just a change in register. The weight was gone, and in its absence, she felt the full gravity of what she was and what she had done arriving now that there was nothing in her hands to give the energy somewhere to go. She pressed her lips together. Hard. Walker saw it. He said nothing. He just stood there, which was the right thing, and waited, which was also the right thing, and she took 2 breaths and got herself back, and he was still just standing there when she did. Your father taught you well, he said. She looked at him sharply. You've said his name twice, Walker said. Once under your breath before the first shot. Once when you were coaching the man in the motor pool bay. He paused. I don't know what happened. I told you I wasn't asking. But whoever he was, he gave you something real. She felt the pressure behind her eyes that she had been holding off since the first mortar round. He would have... She stopped, started again. He would have had a lot of technical notes on my positioning. He always had notes. Walker almost smiled. Good coaches do. He was the best I've ever seen, she said. And it came out simply and truly, and without the armor she usually wrapped around anything that had to do with Raymond Mitchell. He was the most patient man I've ever known, and the most honest, and he never once let me settle for less than what I was actually capable of. She paused. I think I've been settling for less than what I was capable of for about 12 years. Walker looked at her. Not anymore, he said. Not a question, not a consolation, a statement of observed fact delivered with the same precision he brought to everything. She held his gaze. Not anymore, she agreed. He let that sit for a moment. Then he said, the debrief this afternoon is going to lead somewhere. I want you to be prepared for that. What do you mean? I mean, Hargrove doesn't ask for full verbal and written debriefs from civilians because he's completing paperwork, Walker said. I mean, the 2 people with him were not his adjutants. I mean, the questions he was asking you were not the questions of a commanding officer processing an incident. They were the questions of someone assessing a candidate. She went very still. A candidate for what? Walker said nothing for a moment. He looked out at the range, their range, the one she had swept every morning, the one where she had spent 8 months watching and learning and pretending she was only there to collect brass. It was damaged now. The mortar impacts had changed the terrain. The flagpoles she had watched for wind reads were either standing or not standing, and she didn't want to check. It looked like what it was a place where something violent had happened. There are pathways, Walker said carefully, for people with demonstrated capability who don't fit the standard profile. Special programs, specialist tracks. He paused. They're not common, they're not offered often, and they are not easy. She understood what he was telling her. She understood it completely, and she stood with it for a long moment, turning it over, looking at it from every angle, the way she looked at a firing solution, checking for variables she might have missed, assumptions. She might be making optimism that might be distorting her read. I'm 31 years old, she said. I know. I've been out of any competitive shooting context for 12 years. I know that too. Today was the first time I've ever, she stopped. The first time in a real, Sarah, Walker said. I know everything you're about to say. I've run every one of those variables already. So has Hargrove. So will the people he sends this debrief to. He looked at her directly. None of those variables are disqualifying. What you demonstrated today is not something that can be manufactured in a training program. You either have it or you don't. A long silence. And I have it, she said. You have it, Walker said. No hesitation, no qualification. She breathed in, breathed out. The afternoon thermal was in full cycle now, pulling the warm air up off the desert floor, and she could feel it on her face and in her hair, and it occurred to her in the strange sideways way that observations arrive when everything else has been stripped away. that she was standing on a range she had cleaned every morning for 8 months, and it felt for the first time like ground she had a right to stand on, not borrowed, not invisible, hers. That evening, the debrief took 3 hours. The intelligence officer, a woman named Captain Elaine Chu, precise and thorough, with the kind of mind that didn't miss anything and didn't apologize for it, walked her through every minute of the engagement, from the moment the first mortar round hit to the final shot at 820 meters. She asked questions Sarah hadn't anticipated, and several she had, and Sarah answered all of them with the same honesty Walker had asked for, and that she had apparently been giving ever since she handed the rifle back. Chu recorded everything. She asked for clarification on the wind call methodology. She asked about the moving target calculation. She asked about the decision to move to the exterior position for the south approach. Every decision point, every technical choice, every moment where Sarah had made a call that the situation did not require her to make, and she had made it anyway. At the end of 3 hours, Chu closed her recording device and looked at Sarah across the table and said, "One more question, and this one is not for the debrief." Sarah waited. "Were you afraid?" Chu asked. Sarah thought about it. Honest answer. The only kind. "Yes," she said, "but the fear was smaller than the thing I was trying to do. So it didn't win." Chu looked at her for a moment. Then she nodded and gathered her materials and left without another word. 2 days passed. Sarah went back to her room and slept for 14 hours the first night, and when she woke up, the headache had arrived as predicted, and she lay in the dark with her forearm over her eyes and processed in fragments, and non-linearly the way the mind processes things that don't fit in any existing file. What had happened? She thought about each shot. She thought about the ones that had connected and the ones she had corrected and the one at 820 that she was still not entirely sure she should have been able to make. She thought about Torres in the east slot. She thought about Marcus Davis counting his breaths. She thought about Walker's hand on her shoulder and the 2 seconds she had allowed herself with her forehead on the rifle stock and the Apache coming in over the ridge with the sound of something ending. She thought about her father. She thought, "You would have had notes. You always had notes, but I think you would have been okay with most of it." On the second day, Jason Ortiz knocked on her door. She opened it. He was in civilian clothes the first time she had seen him out of kit, and he was holding 2 cups of coffee from the dining facility, and he held one out to her without preamble. She took it. "Can I come in?" he said. She stepped back. He came in and sat in the single chair, and she sat on the edge of her bunk, and they drank their coffee, and neither of them said anything for about 90 seconds, which turned out to be a comfortable 90 seconds, which told her something about what the last 53 minutes had done to the architecture of how these two people related to each other. "I've been a spotter for 7 years, Ortiz said finally. "I have worked with 12 different shooters in operational environments." He paused. "What I called for you in there, I called it the same way I'd call for any of them. Same cadence, same format, same level of information. You know what the difference was?" She looked at him. "What?" "You were always ahead of me," he said. "Every single call. I'm running the data and I'm building the call, and before I get there, you're already there. Not guessing, not approximating, ahead." He shook his head slowly. "I've never spotted for anyone who was ahead of me. Not once in 7 years." She didn't know what to say to that. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "I want to ask you something," Ortiz said, "and you can tell me to mind my own business." "Okay." "The 12 years," he said. "The gap. What was it really? Because it wasn't just life getting in the way. I can hear that. It was something specific." She looked at him. He waited. He had learned to wait from the same man she had from watching Walker, and she recognized the patience of it and respected it enough to give him the honest answer. "I stopped believing I was still the person who could do it," she said. "After everything that happened, my mother, my father, the money, the time I looked in the mirror one day, and I didn't see a shooter anymore. I just saw someone who used to be one." She paused. "And once you decide that about yourself, everything you do after that confirms it, because you're not trying anymore. You're just filling space." Ortiz was quiet. And now, she thought about standing on that berm, about the rifle in her hands that felt correct, about her father's voice in Walker's words in the 820 meters that she should not have been able to manage and had managed anyway. Now, she said, "I think the person I used to be was never actually gone. I think she was just waiting for something real enough to come back for. Ortiz nodded slowly. That's it, he said quietly. That's exactly it. He finished his coffee. He stood up. He looked at her with the expression of a man who has made a private decision about something and is at peace with it. Walker put my name on a recommendation, he said, for your program evaluation. If it goes where he thinks it's going to go. He paused. I want you to know I didn't do that because of what happened. I did it because of what I saw. Because the best thing a spotter can do for this program is tell the truth about what they've seen through that scope. He met her eyes, and what I saw was elite, full stop. He left. She sat with her coffee going cold in her hands, and the morning light coming through the small window, and the sound of the bass resuming its rhythms around her vehicles. Radio traffic footsteps, the organized pulse of a place that had survived something and was getting back to work. On the third day, Walker came. He knocked once. She opened the door and he was in uniform, and his arm was bandaged properly. Now the sleeve rolled back, the dressing white and clean, and he was holding a single sheet of paper. He held it out. She took it. It was a formal document. She read it slowly, read it again. The language was precise and official, and she had to work through some of the terminology, but the substance was clear. It was an invitation to undergo evaluation for a specialized program, a specialist track within a special operations context, conditional on medical clearance, background vetting, and a formal assessment period. Not a guarantee, an opportunity. She looked up from the paper. Walker was watching her with that same expression she had first seen on the range, the evaluating look, the one that was running calculations she couldn't fully see. Except now it had something else in it, something that looked around the edges like satisfaction, like a man who had made a bet on an outcome and watched it arrive exactly as predicted. This is real, she said. It's real. This isn't something that happens to people like me. It didn't used to, Walker said. Today it does, he paused. The question is whether you want it. She looked at the paper. She thought about everything it would require. The training, the physical demands of a process designed to break most of the people who attempted it. The complete dismantling of the invisible life she had built, and the rebuilding of something she didn't yet have a clear picture of. She thought about being 31 and starting something that most people began at 22. She thought about the gap in the years, in the quartier. She thought about her father's voice. You can make the shot or you can't. If you can and you don't, that's a choice too. Know which choice you're making. She knew which choice she was making. When do I start? She said. Walker's expression completed itself. The satisfaction came fully to the surface, and it was the most unguarded she had ever seen him, a man who spent most of his life at controlled temperatures, allowing himself for one moment to be warm. Assessment period begins in 3 weeks, he said. There's paperwork, medical, a clearance process that's going to feel invasive. He paused. None of it is going to be the hard part. I know, she said. The hard part is everything after. I know that too. He nodded. He looked at her one more time, the full look, the one that didn't miss anything, and then he said, your father would be proud. She held that. She let it in the way she had been learning to let things in again after 12 years of keeping them out. She felt it the way she felt the weight of the rifle, correct, real. Something that had always been there waiting for the moment she was ready to receive it. Yeah, she said softly, I think so. 3 weeks later, Sarah Mitchell stood at the entrance of a special operations evaluation facility at 05:30 in the morning. New rifle on her back, new uniform on her body, her name on a roster that nobody had expected to see in a program that very few people made it through on the first day of the hardest thing she had ever chosen to do. Behind her 8 months of collected brass and deliberate invisibility, and a life spent watching from the outside of a world she belonged in. Behind her 12 years of silence, and a girl who had stopped believing in herself, and a woman who had quietly, without announcing it to anyone, never stopped knowing how to shoot. Behind her, a forward operating base, a Ranger rifle handed across in the last possible moment by a man who had seen her when she thought she was unseen, and a 53-minute window in which everything she had ever been was asked to prove it was still alive. It was still alive. She had proven it. Ahead of her was a path that would not be kind and would not be forgiving and would not make any accommodation for the years she had lost or the life she had set aside or the version of herself she had buried under 8 months of invisible mornings on a cleaning contractor's wage. Ahead of her was everything she had been capable of all along. She took the first step forward. And Sarah Mitchell, who had been the woman nobody saw, who had spent years becoming smaller than she was, who had collected the spent brass of other people's ambitions, while her own sat compressed in waiting in the dark, walked through the door and did not look back. She had never needed to be saved. She had only needed a reason to stop pretending she was someone who did.